an excellent panel. We got a Deputy Foreign Minister of Myanmar. I had the pleasure of listening to him in Yunnan twice in two of the international conferences. Then we have Dr. Uday Bhanu Singh, who has been associated so much with Myanmar that he should get a de facto citizenship of Myanmar by now. Then we have Mr. Rajiv Bhattacharya, who truly shows the true colors of all what is really going on. So we are thankful to him. No more sugar coating. And then we have Dr. Pushpita Das, my old colleague, old friend. And let me tell you, she is one of the foremost scholars who have worked on border management. So much so that the BASF instituted a border management institute. So that shows how much impressive she has been. Okay, welcome to this session. And this session is more tricky and a little bit more nuanced in terms of we are discussing the bilateral relations between the two countries. As my predecessor has really charted out, Mr. Maung Win, former Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs, will be the first speaker for the session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Let me begin on a personal note. I served in our foreign ministry for altogether 37 years. And one of the things that I'm really proud of, and which I took as one of my great achievement, was that I was the chief negotiator from the Myanmar side for the Kalay-Tamu Road. And I was so happy that we were able to conclude and later construct this road, which is so essential for the development of that particular area, which is, even by Myanmar standard, was not very developed. So I take this opportunity just to relate in a way, my connection with India. During the previous session, there was one question: how India is viewed from Myanmar. And in my presentation, I think this is going to be the main focus. Yesterday, while looking at my Facebook, I came across this picture. This is General Aung San and, of course, Mr. Nehru. And this was taken when General Aung San, I attach great importance to this photo and to this event, because General Aung San, on his way to London in January 1947 to discuss about the eventual independence for Myanmar. So what he did was, on the way, he made a stopover in New Delhi. To be exact, on the 2nd January 1947. And in many ways, Nehru, because General Aung San, for him, this was also his very first major diplomatic engagement. And he was going to talk and discuss with the British for the eventual independence. And as far as I understand, Nehru gave many, many good advice regarding the forthcoming discussions. Eventually, because after, and of course, there's one other footnote, is that you will see that General Aung San is still wearing a military uniform, and Nehru said, "You cannot go to London in those clothes. You will die from cold exposure." And he gave, but there was no overcoat, because General Aung San is not very big, and there was no overcoat immediately available for him. So he was given 2 army greatcoats that was only available for him. And he wore that great military coat given by Nehru to the conference in London. This just, I want to add a little footnote, and to show how intertwined our 2 countries in our struggle for independence. Because following this visit, we have the Aung San Attlee Agreement, which is the basis for our independence. Actually, I divided my talk into 3 parts, but the first part I will go very quickly. Of course, since I'm going to talk about Myanmar-India relations only, and let me also further narrow my discussion, because in the interest of time, I'm going to deal mostly devoted to political aspect, diplomatic aspect of our relations, and not so much the economic and social aspect, because I don't think I will have enough time to touch all of them. So if we look at Myanmar-Indian relations, of course we have long historical, cultural, and ethnic and religious ties. In fact, the Indian Foreign Ministry, according to their publication, they said, India-Myanmar relations are rooted in shared historical, ethnic, cultural, and religious ties. This is what is written in the Indian Ministry of External Affairs booklet about the relations with Myanmar. So we have a long relationship, which, as I just mentioned when I was talking about the photograph, how we have strengthened our ties during our struggle for independence. And at the third point, I mentioned that successive governments have worked for consolidation of friendship and cooperation. And for that, I have only one, I just want to highlight only one point. Starting from the photo I've shown, General Aung San. Every Myanmar leader, after General Aung San, we have U Nu. Then we have General Ne Win. Every Myanmar leader, since General Aung San and U Nu, up to the President U Thein Sein, had paid official or state visits to Myanmar, to India. This I say that the importance, to underline the importance that Myanmar attaches to its relations with India. Because leaders don't go visiting other countries without reason. I've also, with me here, 2 paragraphs regarding foreign policy in our present constitution. And of course, the first article said practices independent, active, and non-aligned foreign policy aimed at world peace and friendly relations with nations and upholds the principle. One thing I would like to emphasize is the last line, upholds the principles of peaceful coexistence among nations. When we say peaceful coexistence among nations, we are talking about the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, which is one of the pillars of our foreign policy. And it was laid down together with China by India and Myanmar. It was signed by Chinese, the then Premier Chu Enlai, by Mr. Nehru, and by UNU. And these principles remain the basic pillar of our foreign policy. And these 5 principles were later incorporated into the 10 Bandung. These were laid down in 1954. In 1955, when we have the Afro-Asian meeting in Bandung, they were incorporated into the 10 principles, which later became the foundation for a non-aligned movement. Both Myanmar and India played a great role. And of course, there was one thing that we must also emphasize, because this second paragraph was especially put in, especially because we are very conscious of the second point. And that is, no foreign troops will be permitted to be deployed in the territory of the Union. This is a principle we have applied throughout all these years. And continuing about the various pillars of our foreign policy, of course we want friendly relations with all nations. Every country normally wants friendly relations. But in our case, we made a special mention that we want especially good relations with our neighbors, because we believe that for the peace and stability, as well as for the economic development and progress, the neighboring countries has a special role to play. We are more committed to play a more active role in the regional and international affairs, as can be seen by the fact that, in 2014, we were, I think this is the first time that such a thing has happened. We played host to both BIMSTEC and ASEAN as chairman. And indeed, our association, we became a member of ASEAN in 1997. At the same time, in the same year, although we were not a full member, we became associated with BIMSTEC in the same year in 1997. We look at the world today, and we find that regional economic cooperation has assumed greater importance. There are many, many initiatives going on. And we in Myanmar feel that we are confident, we should be confident enough to participate in these regional economic cooperation endeavors. And of course, there are two, including the Sub-Mekong region and GMS and all that. So we are trying to play a role. But at the same time, of course, in all foreign policies around the world, there is both continuity and change. Continuity in the sense that you keep the basic principles, but you also adapt to the changing. In implementing them, you also adapt to the changing conditions and circumstances. This is just by way of introduction, because my main theme will be our relations with India. Now, as to how we look at India. Well, as I said in the beginning, we shared many historical things as well. And of course, one fact that sometimes get lost is that, you know, when the British conquered Myanmar, they took our king to India, even as they took Savasha to Myanmar, and Savasha died in Myanmar, and King Thimpho died in India. And India, as I said, we have this very long tradition, and at the same time, India was one of the first countries in which we established our diplomatic relations. And I must say, let me diverge a little bit. The British, when the General Aung San signed this Aung San Attlee agreement, the British were, I give them full credit, said, if you are going to be independent, you must have a foreign service, you must be able to open embassies. And in our case, we decided on 6 nations where we want our first embassies. And one of them is India. Of course, you know, the vast majority of our people are Buddhists. And for us, India is always the land of Buddha, the land of Buddhism, the birthplace of Buddhism. India, in our eyes, is a trusted friend. We never, let me stress, we has never considered India as a national security threat. We have never felt threatened by India. We may not see eye to eye, because every nation has its own priorities, has its own policies. We may not always see eye to eye in everything. But one thing that is sure from our point of view is that we never consider India as a security threat, although India is much more powerful than us. We welcome the fact, indeed, we welcome the fact that India's stature in the world, India's economic power in the world is growing, because you are a friend of our country. And let me also add that in this regard, we fully endorse your efforts to become a member of the UN Security Council. Sorry, because I have very weak eyes, and because of the light, I have some problem with my eyes. At the same time, I'm not going to go into details, because there are much more. There are people who are familiar with the economic and side, and with the assistance program from India to Myanmar. But what I would like to say is that we do look forward to greater ties, economic ties, trade ties, investment ties with India. I'm not going to talk in numbers, but I want to talk in terms of policy. And that we look to India as our partner for progress. Yes, we share a common border of over 1,000 kilometers, or some say 1,600 kilometers of common border. But let me add one thing about when we say about common borders. I used to say that border demarcations and border lines exist on map. Between India and Myanmar, there is not even a line drawn by white paint saying that this is India or this is Myanmar. And people from both sides, the villagers from both sides, they don't really care whether they are in India or in Myanmar. Because when there is a market day, as you know, in some of these small places, there's no market for every day. Sometimes it's held 5 days a day, or every 5 days, or every 7 days, or every 3 days. People just cross over. And let me add, about 10 years ago, I had a chance to travel actually with our Vice Commander-in-Chief to Shillong. And on the way back, we visited all the major towns in the Khin state. In the India-Myanmar border, including the Reed area, because we also visited the Reed Lake, which is so important for the people around the area. And what we find is that, I don't know about today, because this has happened about 10 years ago, the infrastructure, the road infrastructure is very weak. And we have to go by. The only way that we can visit all these 10 places, all these places, is by helicopter. Because I say this because I want to let you know the situation on our side. And the thing is that in the border areas, you can go on for miles and miles without coming across a single village. This is the fact of life in our border areas. But at the same time, for us, from our Myanmar perspective, of course, let's forget Laos, because Laos and we have 5 neighbors, forget Laos, among the other 4. You are the only country that we have no big security issues, border security issues. Of course, we know that what happened recently at the border, but from our perspective, this is much more, small compared to the problems we have at the 3 other areas. And another thing is that this is a fact of life. There are villages, there are places which are, I will tell you very frankly, because of the lack of infrastructure, because of the terrain, and because of other factors, where the writ of the government is very minimal. This is, I will tell you very frankly, this is the true situation in some of our border areas with India. Yes? And so, with this, I would like to go to my last portion. Because this was, I think this is also important for the future of our relations. We are having elections, general elections, in 2015, November 8th. As I mentioned before, transitions are never easy. In these 4 years of transition, we face many difficult tasks, challenges. Our path has not always been in a straight line. We have to sometimes take a zigzag, sometimes even make a bend backwards to go forward. But this is, I think, is quite natural. And one thing, of course, I'm not, fortune teller, so I cannot say who will win the election or who will come out the winners in the election. But what I can say, and when I say what I can say, is what most observers believe is that Myanmar will enter a new political stage after the election. Because according to the schedule, the elections will be on the 8th November, and a new government will be sworn in around about the end of March 2016. So, as I said, I'm no fortune teller, and because our political situation is quite complicated, and there are many factors involved, because if I want to talk about it, it will be another session, so I will just stop at that. But one thing I can assure you, that our basic, whatever government comes in, our basic foreign policy orientation will not change. Of that, I'm sure. Yes, there may be some nuances. Of course, the government, the present government, or whoever comes in, might have its own priorities. There may be some nuances, but the basic orientation will not change. And for me, whatever the government takes over in March 2016, the government will surely like to pursue a policy of friendship and cooperation with India. Thank you very much.